called the Prix de Rome. I don't know why they call it that in French, but it sounds maybe even more prestigious. But in literature, you don't apply for it, and you just get a letter. They do everything through the mail, which is very wonderful and old-fashioned. And so, the day my wife gave birth, had a cesarean section and delivered the boys, in the envelope, in the mailbox when I got home, was an envelope from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And they said, you've been selected for this prize, and will you be available to go in September? So I had to go back to the hospital, with that. And, my wife's got the morphine drip going, and they're like, hey, here's the gas bill, and look at this. There's something else in the mail that they...
It was probably not a very good day to visit her, because I don't think she probably was very excited about getting on a plane and going all that distance.
Yeah, I think then we still didn't understand really what raising twins meant, so I think it was actually good, and it was a blessing that it came early. She just kept saying, what about the dog? Can we bring the dog?
Well, I just think that's wonderful. It's just a great, great story of Virginia.
Well, I want to go back to a comment that you made, that you were discussing getting embroiled, I don't know if that's the right word, but engrossed in your journals, and that is, you think of yourself primarily as a fiction writer. And why is that? Why do you...
I think because I'm addicted to the magic of fiction. The magic of concocting worlds through prose. And you can certainly do it in narrative nonfiction too. I'm reading Travels with Herodotus right now, which is this beautiful new travel book. And you can deliver the world in prose, but there's something about fictional, made-up places. Real places in real time. Historical novels. The magic of conjuring a world with just little black characters on white paper. It's scary magic. It's incredible, really. And it's for me, reading is an even more engrossing experience than a film, which is also a very engrossing experience. But film can only really appeal to the visual and auditory senses, but prose, you can get all of them. You can get all the senses, and you can enter people's heads, which filmmakers haven't quite figured out how to do yet. You can enter thoughts and deliver not only a character's world, but the way in which a character thinks through how you deliver the prose. And I love that. It's addictive to, it's addictive. And I don't think of my life as very interesting. I think of this almost as an anti-memoir. I hope it's not necessarily about capital I, as so many memoirs are. It's more about the things that we saw and experienced there, and not so much about me as a person. I just don't think I'm that interesting. I'd rather make up interesting people and let them live interesting lives. And live a mundane life as a writer, and let your passion be in your prose in a sense.
Do you have lots and lots of stories in your head, do you think?
Yeah, often. It's much more fun for me to start a project than it is to kind of see it through, this awful middle ground. It's fun to finish a project too, but there's this miserable middle ground where you really have to gut through the difficult scenes. Often you can sense what's going to be the hardest scene to write, and you keep putting it off and putting it off, and then there comes the month where you have to write that scene. So I like starting things. Yeah, I always have new ideas, or books and stories, short stories. I think I would love to be a short story writer, and I'm in this interesting part of my career where I'm trying to be a professional writer, maybe more so than a teacher. I like teaching very much, but there's this joy of being able to pursue whatever you want. It's ultimate independence, being a writer. And so I have to realize that short stories in America don't sell very well. You can get an advance from your publisher for a short story collection like my first book. It will be nothing compared to an advance for a novel, because novels do sell better, whether or not they should, or whether or not short stories shouldn't fit better into the American lifestyle. We have less time, and on the surface anyway, it seems like short story collections would be a wonderful thing. People could take in a 20-minute short story before bed. It's like an episode of Law and Order versus, a novel is a commitment. That's 18, 20 hours of your life you're giving. So that said, I think publishers are still really, really reluctant to take short stories because they don't make the money, and so I have to decide: am I going to keep pursuing short stories? Magazines have all cut back on short stories. Fitzgerald used to make, in the 20s, he would make $8,000 or $9,000 for, in dollars, 1920s dollars for a short story, and the best you can make for a short story now is maybe $5,000 or $6,000 from the New Yorker, and after the New Yorker, it's pretty slim. You know, there's wonderful magazines publishing wonderful short fiction, but they're not necessarily paying very well for it.
On that note, I bring her from a conclusion, but to our viewers, the great news is you'll be back again next week, and we shall continue our interview with Anthony Dorr, who's written 3 wonderful books, one titled The Shell Collector, and the second one's called About Grace, and the third one's The 4 Seasons in Rome. On today's program, we talked somewhat about The 4 Seasons in Rome, but we will talk more about the other 2 books, and again, his wonderful style of writing, and I know that you've enjoyed the program as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. And as I indicated, he will be back at the same time on this station next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am so pleased to welcome you back to the second week of a 2-week series with our guest, an author who is so gifted. I welcome to the program again this week Anthony Dorr. He is the author of 3 very successful books that have received lots of awards. His books are The Shell Collector, the second one is About Grace, and his third book is 4 Seasons in Rome. Our distinguished author has won many awards, and I will give you simply a few examples. He received 2 O. Henry Prizes and a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. His first book, The Shell Collector, won the 2002 Discovery Prize for Fiction, and Dorr shared the New York Public Library's 2003 Young Lines Award. In addition to that, he also received something called the Rome Prize. You don't apply for it. They choose, and they did in his case, and he and his family were in Italy for a year. And from that visit, he wrote 4 Seasons in Rome. Tony, welcome back to the program. You're just such an accomplished writer at a young age, and I know in the years to come you'll receive many more awards as you continue. I know you're working on a book now. It was a delight interviewing you last week, and we look forward to this week's interview also.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm so pleased to have as our panelist today my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Virginia Tensley Johnson. She chairs the Division of Communication, Fine Arts, and Humanities at North Idaho College, and she's a very distinguished faculty member of our college. In fact, one year she was selected in the entire United States as the Teacher of the Year in Community Colleges. And with that, I'll ask Virginia to start today's questioning.
Okay. Tony mentioned the Rome Prize, which was awarded to you as a kind of surprise, but I'd like you to tell us how you acquired the title of Idaho Writer in Residence, which you now have.
Sure. That's chosen by the Idaho Commission for the Arts, and you do apply for that one. And once I saw Kim Barnes had it last year, the last 3 years, 2004 to 2007, and once I saw, got to know her a little bit and saw the list of the previous writers, which also includes her husband, Bob Wrigley, Robert Wrigley, the poet, realized that, there's this terrific tradition of writers, from Bartis Fisher all the way up to Kim Barnes, and, it'd be an honor to be a part of that, so I thought I'd apply. The thing I really love about it is the emphasis on rural communities. They're also not only, your obligations are to do 4 readings a year for 3 years, but, as soon as I got it, Court Conley, who runs the program, was, asking me which communities I would like to go to, and he suggested places like Atlanta or, Council, where, you were born, in, Atlanta, I think the population is only maybe 60 year-round. So I think that's wonderful, to get for me to get to know more of Idaho outside the Treasure Valley, and also to kind of bring books to smaller mountain communities and prairie communities. It's a pleasure, it's a joy. So it's an honor too, to get to represent your state in kind of a more formal way. Because I feel like I represent Idaho in other ways. Often you get to go to New York for things in the writing world, and people have these ideas about Idaho that we kind of shovel our way out to our cars every morning, and
If we have a car.
that's right, to the wagon. Right. So I feel like I've been representing Idaho in some ways for a while, and it's nice to make it kind of more formal, I guess.
When you do these readings, and you're going to be doing one here in Coeur d'Alene, how do you choose what you're going to read?
In some ways, except for my work for the Boston Globe, I write a column for the Boston Globe, and that has obvious deadlines. But in some ways, I use the readings as deadlines. I try to get something ready, especially if it's going to be a short story that I'm reading. It's really nice to know, well, in November I'll be visiting wherever, blah, 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 university, and I can use that as a date to try to get something ready. Anything to motivate you is nice. But also, I had this book come out in July, so there's always, often the publisher sends you on book tour, so often, you're out to promote a specific book, whether it's in hardcover, or then when it comes out in paperback a year later, you go around again. So often your publisher wants you to support a certain book so that people might buy copies of it.
Okay.
Too much commercialism, probably.
Yeah,
Too much
that's a
reality,
reality.
but
Yeah, I'm sure.
One has to make a living.
right.
Especially with a wonderful family. You have young twin boys and a wife. I want you to talk some about the book about grace.
Sure.
And each of your books has somewhat a different approach, which you wouldn't expect. And as we've indicated, two of them are fiction, and Four Seasons in Rome is not. It's about your year in Rome. How did you come about choosing this particular theme? And I know, like in the Shell Collector, you have stories, different stories. But give our viewers who might wish to read that book some of the issues or themes in the book about grace.
You bet. My first book was a collection of 8 short stories. The longest one was maybe 10,000 words, which is 30 pages. And then I started working on About Grace, which turned out to be 100,000 words. It was just a total new universe for me. I felt like I had gone from maybe being a drawer or a sketcher to a painter. You're working on such a large scale that you can't even remember some of the details in the novel because you haven't worked on them in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. It took me 3 years to write, and the main character is a man named David Winkler, who is a hydrologist. He studies the formations of snow crystals. It sounds dry, but hopefully I make it a little more interesting in the book. And he has this gift/curse of premonition. Occasionally, maybe 20 times in his life, he has dreams at night, like any of our dreams, but these dreams come true later, a few days later. And early in the book, he's a young father, and he dreams that his infant daughter will drown in a flood in their neighborhood, that the river near their house floods, and his daughter will drown in it. And then in the subsequent days, after he wakes up, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, the river does start to crest, and he gets quite worried that he's going to accidentally drown his daughter without, and fulfill this strange prophecy, but his wife doesn't believe in it, and he himself can't quite figure it out. So what he does is he just leaves. He tries to get as far away from his daughter. And circumstances work against him so that he doesn't go back for about 30 years. He doesn't go back, and he doesn't know if she survived this flood. And much of the book is this kind of quest. I tried to retell the Odyssey in some ways, in a much more humble way, I hope, to try to search for this daughter whose name is Grace. And it's a quest to try to find out what happened with her, and then eventually make peace with the decisions that he made. So for me, it's about time. A lot of it was about time, and I try to disrupt the chronology of the story and tell it in an untraditional way where I'm telling things that have happened previously and then moving backward and forward in time. It's about time and family for me. It's about, is this the greatest transgression you can commit, which is to leave a very young, infant, and, except for maybe murder, it's a huge cultural transgression. It's a state of disgrace, and then how do you return to some kind of stability, some kind of equilibrium? And I try to explore all the different ideas of grace, from saying a prayer before you eat to, even that Catholic idea of this clarifying fire that comes down to you from heaven, and all those ideas in between, secular and religious ideas about grace.
So grace means more than one thing.
I think, yeah, it's obviously the daughter.
But then there's the other issue of grace.
And Winkler is, in some ways, maybe a stereotypical scientist in that he's very ungraceful in social situations and doesn't quite behave. He's an anti-hero. He's not. Ben Affleck is not going to play David Winkler in a movie version of About Grace. He's not a swashbuckler.
That brings up another question that I was thinking about asking last week, and that is this: you did say last week that some characters get eliminated as you're going along, or maybe your publisher wants it. But with all the characters you've had in your books, I guess my question is: are some of those characters you admire and others you don't admire?
Certainly, yeah. I think that it's an interesting thing to play with as an author, is the authorial distance between you as a writer and the character. And I think, I urge my students to, write about, if it's a 21-year-old man in Boise, write about a 93-year-old Finnish woman in 1730, and see if maybe you can align with each other in morality and in the way you look at the world and your worldview, or maybe, you distance yourself and write about a character who behaves poorly. I think that's really interesting. It's what makes fiction good: tension, conflict between an antagonist and a protagonist. And when you make a moral decision that is at once understandable and also unforgivable, that's kind of the lifeblood of fiction in a lot of the stories that I'm interested in.
That reminds me, because we have some faculty members here that are very gifted in Chautauqua format. Here's one of them here in Virginia Johnson. And some of them, if they've done different characters, they say, some characters I do, and I just have such admiration for them. Other characters, the audience doesn't see this, but I really don't like this character.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Virginia?
Well, having read About Grace, I just wanted to comment. I've read all three of your books about your ability to do what you talked about last week, which is to enrich the readers' lives by creating this world for them. And your mastery of imagery just makes me, as I told several friends, I didn't want the stories to end. I mean that. When I was reading in The Shell Collector, I would say how many pages to go, and I'd slow down and read very slowly, and I'd go do something else, because I truly didn't want the stories to end. They are so engaging. And I think part of that is not only the characters, but the way that you handle language and the imagery. And you talked a little bit last time, and I'd like to pursue that a little bit and maybe read something to us, where you've sculpted and redone and worked on the description of a place. And I pick out the metaphors and the similes, and I go, oh, why couldn't I write something like that? They're just so fresh. And that, having taught writing, I know that's something that is difficult, a difficult task to teach. But I guess I'm asking about the process of the imagery and where that comes from, and maybe read us an example out of one of your books.
Yeah, thanks so much, Virginia. That's really sweet. That makes my day. That's what I spend 99% of my time on. Ideas like grace, or what will this novel be about? Those are the ideas you have when you're washing the dishes or you're walking the dog and you're trying to understand what it is you worked on that day. But when you're writing, 99% of your energy, or at least in my case, is on just word by word, moment by moment, trying to make a vivid dream that will play in the reader's mind. A moment by moment authenticating detail of a place or of an experience. What's it like to be freezing cold and scared, for example. And word by word, how can you never interrupt that dream so that your reader will never stop that suspension of disbelief, that classic phrase. How can you keep your reader immersed in that dream? It's just like you don't want to see a microphone cable in the middle of a movie. You don't want to hear somebody sneeze next to you in a movie, because you're in this dirty, sticky floor place, and you don't want to be reminded of that. You want to be engrossed in that world. And that's your job as a writer, I think, in terms of language, is keeping your reader in that state of hypnosis, in a sense, and not letting up. So yeah, that's what I spend my time on. That's what I love. I think the students who want to be writers, who usually turn out to be writers, in my experience, are the ones who love language. It's like you might like the idea of being a writer, or you might like going to the cocktail parties writers get invited to, but those things don't last. It's actually really loving to work with language. English is a humongous language. We have a lot of words. It's a rich language, and in some ways, I feel very privileged that it's my first language because I get to work in it. And there are other, maybe more mellifluous languages, but ours is a very big and rich language. So sure, I can read a little bit from the Rome book. Let me see if I can find a nice example. This is early in the book. The book's divided into 4 seasons, and this is still in the fall. We've been in Rome maybe 2 or 3 weeks. At night, Rome bangs, roars, peals, car alarms, the shunting of a distant train, the backfiring Fiats. At 2 a.m., someone below our window sets off a string of firecrackers. At 3, the trash truck grinds up the street, upends the dumpsters across from our front gate, and drops them again onto the asphalt. Our building funnels noise strangely too, a chair leg squeaking in the upstairs apartment, a door slamming downstairs, a girl's laughter clear as day through the wall behind our headboard. Even when the twins are sleeping quietly, I spring up in bed, thinking I've heard them wake up. I shake Shauna's shoulder. Are they crying? Which one is that? She groans. She stays asleep. I'll stop there. But, you know, to render any moment or place in prose is for me the joy of trying to be a writer, you know, and that's why I go to other writers and see how they do it. And you read a writer like Melville or Cormac McCarthy, Hemingway, and see how they do it, and try to break it apart and understand, word by word, how are they rendering a place. And, that's the pleasure. That's why I go to work every day.
Even though you indicated last week, even as a young child, your mother read to you and your brothers, and then you read a lot of different, it even changed from age to age in some of the areas. But as you read, you learn so much from how they use the language. And here what you just read is, many of us can tell a story, but not with that eloquence, not with the choice of words that just grips the reader. So there's a very special talent there along with the work you've done. But my question is that even though you learn a lot from those, doesn't each author have their own style? You can't just become a Hemingway or something else. You have to have your own style.
Yeah, and that's the miracle of being a teacher of writing, is that every human being brings to words his or her own style of arrangement, his or her own style of arrangement, his or her own worldview, and that there are 6 billion people in the world, and that each of us would put together a sense